Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Deer Talk Now podcast. I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us. Don't know what number this is. Ian, I'm not even going to ask you what number this is because we are getting up there in podcasts. If you are one of the 40,000 weekly viewers or listeners, we thank you. We bring these for you. All we ask you to do is like and subscribe. That's it. Share. Get your buddies into these podcasts because what we try to do is bring you not only solid, practical, comprehensive information about deer and deer hunting, it's also about the products that you use as a deer hunter and how they can make you a better deer hunter. And no better person to help me talk about that today in the archery industry. Gary Cornum, a good friend of ours. Thank you for joining us for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, we talk about a lot of things, Gary. New products. You guys have some, with Easton Archery, you have some new arrows coming out this year. I've already shot the FMJ Maxes. I love them. You know how much I've always loved FMJs. You've got the Axis arrows, which are the straightest, fastest flying carbon arrows out there. But one thing I think we kind of forget about just as hunters, arrows have always been pretty good, haven't they? I mean, no matter what you've been shooting, if you've been shooting for 10 years or 30 years, there's always been an option to have a very straight projectile that you're sending downrange at a deer.
Yeah, I think ever since the days of wood arrows, we've had accurate arrows, which is the number one thing, right? Putting that arrow where it needs to be, it'll get the job done. And then since really back in the 1940s and 50s when Easton came out with aluminum, which just overnight changed the accuracy of arrows over what they were shooting before, which was wood. Ever since that time, it's just been fine-tuning with different materials, everything from the knock to the point, component-wise, including the shaft. It's just been fine-tuning it, and it's funny to look back at 30 years of being focused on arrows, just arrows, that something as simple as a tube, how much they've changed. But incrementally, you just get a little bit of improvement as you go along year after year. And now we've got some really neat stuff that we're bringing out this year that you alluded to, like the new FMJ Max. And when I look back in the rearview mirror, I think, well, it didn't seem like it as I went along, but now that I look at 30 years of change, and I'm like, wow, things have changed a lot, and we do have a much better product today. And really, at the end of the day, it's just so that we can get out and be better bow hunters and do the thing that we love. That's what the products are for. It's not about the product itself, it's about the experience that we get to have by using them.
It is. It makes us that much more efficient. That much I know. And I know as a bow hunter, I've become extremely more efficient over the years. But let's just go back 30 years ago. What was the talk then when we were looking at, I know that you came up with the Super Slam arrows. You were kind of getting to the point where you couldn't make them any straighter.
Right.
So what was the talk then on how to wring the maximum efficiency out of your bow hunting rig?
Yeah, if you look back then, something like a Super Slam was probably the mainstay in the hunting market for arrows. Carbon was just entering the market. When I started at Easton in '93, we had an all-carbon arrow called the PC. It stood for pultruded carbon. And that was kind of our first all-carbon arrow. But we had experimented with carbon going back even further than that. And one thing that I always mention when we're talking arrows and arrows for hunting is that the arrows that are used to win the Olympics, so that's the highest echelons, highest level of archery, are Easton arrows. And we spend a lot of R&D to make those arrows. What's neat about that is as we develop those products for that market, we take that technology, those innovations, those things that we find work well for the world's top archers, and infuse those same attributes into our hunting products. So as we started to get into that carbon, back in '88, I think was the first Olympics, if I'm not mistaken, was the first Olympics where a product with carbon, an arrow that had carbon, was used to win the Olympic gold.
Wow.
Right? And so so yes, the aluminum and the Super Slam back then reigned supreme, but then it was shortly after that we really started to get into the carbon and the hybrids, where you take an aluminum and a carbon component and put it together. and we could talk about why those work so well too. But so now we have all three. Aluminum mostly used for target competition these days, but it's the carbon and the carbon hybrids that are kind of emerged as the top level hunting arrows, and we make those in our factory in Utah.
Let's talk about that that integration again, because I think it's fascinating. Like I said, it's my favorite arrow to hunt with. What was the idea behind fusing carbon with aluminum, and when did that really click and take off?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So as we developed these products, again, for the highest level of competitive archery, we were looking at the attributes of the different materials. Aluminum as a material to make arrows is extremely precise. The spine around shaft, which is critical, you want that arrow to be as consistent as possible as it's flexing into the bow. So you want that arrow needs to be just, the better you can have that stiffness all the way around the shaft, the more accuracy you're going to have out of the bow. Aluminum is the best material at doing that. Carbon is durable and lightweight. So it's not as consistent of a material, but the attributes it brings is durability and lightweight. So you look at those two materials and you say, okay, they're very different. If we bring those together, we get the durability and the lightweight attributes of carbon with the precision of the aluminum. The two materials work in concert, you get a better product. One does this, one does that, and together they're even better than the sum of the parts. That's why things like the FMJ and the AC products that are used to win the Olympics, the X10s, those are hybrids that we make for that reason. Doesn't mean you can't make a great aluminum arrow. You can make a great carbon arrow, but the hybrids are really good because you're sort of getting the best of both worlds.
And it might be in my head, I just think it's a superior bow hunting arrow for deer. And maybe that's because my first arrows were 2117s, and that was what I first knew, and I'm like, well, that's got to be what's just absolutely crushing these deer, or it's a combination of that mental aspect and then knowing that when I put that on a deer, it's accurate downrange, and the penetration is unlike anything else that I experienced.
Right, and that's where, with the Olympics and developing those products, they also want small diameter, but for kind of a different reason. They're sending those arrows way downrange, up to nearly 100 yards. So windy conditions are always affecting those arrows, so small diameter really helps that out. So we developed small diameter products, again, aluminum carbon, but also all carbon for these high levels of archery. They also carry more of their velocity as they go down range because they're smaller diameter, so there's less friction. Well, if you look at that, a lot of those attributes of small diameter work extremely well in the hunting scenario, but kind of for different reasons. Some of them are the same, but some of them are different. One of those is penetration. Once that shaft impacts the animal, that small diameter gets it through there with less friction. The target archers don't need that, but they get that benefit of us developing those micro diameter arrows has really helped us to make that a better hunting product, but for kind of a different reason. Even though wind drift and other things are still important for the bow hunter, the other attributes of retaining its energy and to drive that broadhead through with very little friction really benefits the bow hunter.
And we didn't really think, back in the day, I remember it was like, did you get a pass through? That was a big thing.
Yeah.
Today, it's not even a question anymore.
Right, they blow through.
Today, it's like you're getting a pass through no matter what. I'm shooting 54 pounds, and I don't worry about it
Right,
at all.
and I was talking to some folks here today, and we were talking about, I had some ladies with short draws and lighter poundage bows in the booth, and they said, what do you recommend? And I recommended a 4mm FMJ for that reason. And our field results are showing that that small FMJ, a lot of kinetic energy, very little friction going through is really benefiting any bow hunter. But for those folks that really need something, they're on the edge of really short draws and lighter poundages. They really need all the penetration they can get. So
if you guys haven't checked them out, I suggest it. That's my personal interest. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Hoyt Archery and the all-new Alpha X 30. Compact yet forgiving, it seamlessly blends into your hunting environment, whether you're nestled in your blind, perched in a tree stand, or venturing into the backcountry. The Alpha X30 allows you to make adjustments and tailor your performance like never before with the new HBX Exact Cam. For more information, visit Voigt.com. The other thing I want to talk to you about, Gary, is we talked about this off air a little bit, was you've kind of seen a pendulum swing on components. Can you tell the listeners about that a little bit?
Yeah, so over the last few years, a lot of hunters have wanted to put more weight on the front of their arrows. The concept is the front of center. So an arrow, if you think about it, arrow has more weight up front. And to put it in its most simple terms, think about tying a string to a rock. And think of that, and if that were an arrow. So when you throw that rock, that string is going to follow the mass. That's what in a very rudimentary way, that's what the concept of front of center is. You have more weight at the mass front of the arrow. It's the shaft tends to track behind that mass. If you were to try to throw the string first, it would turn around in flight, and the string would still follow that rock. So that's sort of the concept behind front of center. Now, I've also heard folks that go with the heavier weight for that accuracy reason also report that they're getting better penetration. But that's probably more of a situation where you've got just more mass weight on the arrow in general. But as the hunters have found that this is working well for them in the field, they've asked for better components. So we've innovated the match grade half-outs, which are a heavier half-out insert. It moves the mass out in front of the arrow more, so it increases FOC. They're also heavier to increase FOC, but we've made them with precision features. We have like the self-centering O-ring, so they fit inside the shaft with perfect alignment, and it boosts that FOC. In order to do that, though, with bow hunters choosing to put more weight on the front of their arrows, we've needed to make the shaft lighter. What that does is if you've got a lot of point weight and you've got a heavier shaft, the whole arrow kind of ends up being too heavy. So we've innovated this year the new Easton 5.0 and then the FMJ Max for that reason. So the shaft itself is lighter. That way, guys that would like to boost their FOC with the new match grade half-outs or with a heavier point can do that on a lighter weight shaft platform, but still have an arrow weight that is within the parameters of what they're trying to do.
What are you looking at grains per inch on how much you have reduced the weight on some of these?
It's generally about 2 grains.
My goodness,
yeah,
wow.
Apples to apples. So if you're looking at the carbon,
that's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
It is roughly. But yeah, it's a big step down. The new FMJ Max that we had you shooting is now coming in at about the weight of an Axis arrow. And then the Easton 5.0 is a couple grains lighter in general, roughly, so that a guy that is either looking to pull out all the stops and have a lot of velocity, he can do that with that new shaft, or a guy that would like to take advantage of the match grade half-out system and have a high FOC, higher accuracy setup can do that with that lightweight platform.
And you have it. You can customize it too, right? I mean, like, you have different materials. Brass?
Yeah, we do. We offer a full gamut. So we have depending on the shaft diameter, the half-outs usually start at around 50 grains, and then we have them going up from there up to, just depending on the model, even over 100 grains in some cases. On the 5mm, 50, 75. And then you have the weight of the point on top of that.
And you add that up, what is your magical recipe for... I've always tried to make sure I'm over 400 for a deer hunting arrow. Is that kind of, or do you?
It's kind of that magic number.
Yeah.
And it when you get it all built, but there's fine tuning in there, and that's something else that makes archery kind of fun is the archers that like to get out and try different
play
things.
with it and become a mad scientist.
Hey, I'll try 4 flesh, I'll do this and see how my broadheads fly. Yeah, so you get the tinkerers, and we want to be able to have really an arrow for everybody and every kind of component for everybody, so that they can make their setup the way they would like to have it.
One last thing I want to touch on, Gary, before I let you go, is 2 other things on the components. I noticed the new Micronocks. Can you talk about those for a little bit?
Yeah, so the Microlight Nocks What we found is the ears of the nock, and the closer they are to the back of the shaft is an accuracy enhancement. You imagine you have a tolerance of the nock, and you have the tolerance of the shaft itself, and then the interface is the stem of the nock that goes into the arrow shaft. So if there's any kind of misalignment whatsoever in those tolerances, then it can affect your accuracy. So the closer you put the throat of where the ears come down, the closer you can put the throat to the end of the shaft, the better off you are. Because if there's any tolerance variation, you're limiting the amount of angle that could be misaligned to the shaft. So the closer you can put that throat to the back of the shaft is an accuracy enhancement, and you get the added benefit of a lighter product as well. So
I've never noticed that until I started shooting them here this past year. And for whatever reason, I'm like, I'm shooting really good, and I think that had something to do with it. And I never thought about just that small difference, how it could possibly be
well,
effective.
and it's like I go back when we first started talking. I was talking about how, you look at back 30 years ago, and then you look at where we are today, and it's been a journey but it's incremental improvements, right? So if you look at the arrows today, they're very different than the ones that we had, back in the early 90s. Well, that's because we've been making little incremental improvements like this nock that you're talking about. And then, as we went along, we made that one a little bit better. And then we discovered, hey, what else can we do? We made that a little bit better. So as we've gone along, and then you look in the rearview mirror and you're like, wow, we've come a long way. We've got 4mm arrows now. We've got half outs. We've got microlight nocks and performance vanes. So
that was my last.
Yeah,
my last point was I shot the AAE vanes.
The Hybrid 26.
Those are really nice.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think gets overlooked is you got those standard now on these arrows.
Right. So we do the factory helical fletch, which is so good for broadhead control.
Explain that. What does that do?
So it's a twist on the back. What it does is it's just a quicker spin on the arrow. It's just like throwing a football. If you throw it and you spin it, it's more accurate. Or a bullet, right? You throw it, you spin it, it's more accurate. Well, the helical gets it going quicker, and we're doing that in the factory. And that was an innovation. Used to be that you'd have to get a helical on there, you'd have to hand flesh it.
Right.
Now we're doing it with precision machine, and that's something that I had someone point out to me yesterday on this factory helical fletch, is that with us doing it at the factory, it's done on the same machine, under controlled conditions. So you're not having that, if somebody's hand fletching arrows, there can be variation. How much glue did they put on this vein versus the next vein? Were they distracted? But because we're doing it in a controlled environment with precision machinery, the arrows are consistently fletched one to the next, just like the way we make our arrows coming off the same machine. So with arrows, you want everything to be repeated exactly the same every time, because you want every arrow to shoot exactly the same. And so doing all this with automation the way we do it at our Utah factory, you get a more accurate product, and that includes now the fletching, where we have that precision factory helical that is so good for broadhead flight, but it's also the veins and the way they're applied is repeated every time we run an arrow through that machine.
I love it, because when I had to do it myself, I was terrible at it.
Well, and I fletch too, and it's like, you're going along, and every one I put on might be a little different.
Every one of mine was different, and then I was like, wonder, why do I have three that don't fire?
Right, and I hadn't really thought about that, but we do that, we automate as much as we can, because we're trying to make every arrow identical to the one before it. So that AAE vein that you talked about, that's a premium vein too. That we went out and picked that one and so you find that on our match grade. But premium veins are it's just like I said, it's that incremental improvement. We used to just kind of use this vein or that vein. Well, now we're using premium veins. We have premium nocks. We have premium half outs. And then when you add it all up, you got a premium arrow.
You got a great arrow. I know you guys can check these out on the website. I'll give you that here in a second. But my best advice is go to your local pro shop and ask to see these arrows, because the pro shop guy is going to give you just as much information as Gary gave you here on your particular setup. But it's eastonarchery.com, and those new products The FMJ Max is one if you want to look at it. The other one is
the Easton 5.0.
The 5.0, the match grade series.
And the match grade, 5mm match grade components are there now. All that's out there and available for people to look at. And they're starting to hit dealer shelves now. So get into the pro shops. The pro shops are begging us to get them, so we're getting them out the door as fast as we can.
You spend a lot of money on a bow, but it's not going to matter much if you don't have a nice projectile to send down range.
Yeah, I like to think of it as it's the last thing that sees the deer before. It's like it comes out of the bow, and we're the arrow's the last thing to go through between you and your deer. So
then hopefully that thing is getting hung up on the antlers.
Yeah, it's covering that last yard between you and what you're trying to do.
Awesome. Gary, thanks so much as always. You're just a wealth of information. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, for Gary Cornum, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in next week, Thursday, for another brand new episode of Deer Talk Now.